The book of Genesis tells us exactly why we are looking up. In the very first chapter, verse 14, the text lays out the architecture of the heavens in detail. It says the lights in the firmament were placed there for signs and for seasons and for days and years. We were told to read them. The sky is a script. Turn the page to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 21, verse 25. The instruction becomes a warning. We are promised that there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. You feel that perplexity. I know you do. The nations are distressed, the waves of data are roaring, and here we are, November 2025, caught in the glitch. We have fixated on this single recurring stutter in the sky. We call it Mercury Retrograde. You know this name. It has become the secular devil of our century, the gremlin in the algorithm, the ghost in the server farm. We joke about it. We blame it when the Wi-Fi drops. We roll our eyes when our friends refuse to sign a lease, because the planet of communication has decided to walk backward. We treat it as a meme. I'm here to tell you that the joke is on us. You are right to be afraid. While we were laughing at the memes, the data was quietly proving that this superstition is ripping a hole in the global economy right now as we speak. Let's look at the ledger. Let's look at what happens to the money when the sky stutters. In May of 2020, 3 researchers, Yanling Qi, Hang Wang and Bohui Zhang, decided to test the reality of this phenomenon. They ignored the horoscopes. They used high-frequency financial data. They analyzed stock market indexes in 48 countries over a period of 47 years, tracking the flow of capital from 1973 all the way to 2019. The numbers are terrifying. They found that during weeks exactly like this one, when Mercury appears to move backward, stock market returns are approximately 3.22% lower annually than during the rest of the year. 3.22%. In a global economy that fights for fractions of a penny, that number is a massacre. It corresponds to roughly 22.56% of the unconditional mean in annual returns. 1/5 of the expected growth vanishes. It evaporates. The researchers had to ask why. Is the planet Mercury physically pulling the gold out of the vaults? They checked the physical reality. They checked the real effects. If Mercury retrograde actually breaks machines and causes chaos, we should see the wreckage. We should see planes falling out of the sky. We should see cars careening off the highways. They pulled the data on aviation disasters. They pulled the data on traffic fatalities. They found nothing. There is no significant increase in accidents during these periods. The planes fly fine. The cars stay in their lanes. The physical machinery of the world operates with perfect, indifferent precision. The world is not breaking, we are breaking. The market crashes because we stop. The researchers identified the cause as the belief channel. Investors who hold these astrological beliefs become paralyzed. They read the warnings that say, do not sign contracts, do not start anything new. They obey. They sit out. They withdraw their liquidity. They withdraw their courage. This is the silence of a room where everyone has suddenly decided to stop speaking. A collective strike against the future. We are the glitch. The planet is just a mirror, and we have terrified ourselves with our own reflection. But why? Why does a banker in London today feel a primal urge to sit out just because a rock tens of millions of miles away passes the Earth? Where did we get this idea that the retrograde is a time of broken promises and failed ventures? To answer that, we have to leave the trading floor. We have to go back to the source code. We have to go to Alexandria, Egypt, in the 2nd century. We have to meet the man who wrote the operating system of the Western soul. His name was Claudius Ptolemy. Forget the image of the wizard in the pointed hat. Ptolemy was a mathematician. He was a geographer. He drew the maps of the world. And in his masterpiece, the Tetrabiblos, he drew the map of the heavens. Stand with him on the steps of the Great Library. Look up. You see a vacuum. You see empty space, cold and dead. Ptolemy saw a plenum. He saw a universe packed tight, a living organism, a hydraulic machine where every movement of a star exerted a physical pressure on the atmosphere of the Earth. His logic was rigorous. The sun clearly affects the earth through heat and the seasons. The moon clearly affects the earth through the tides and biological cycles. Therefore, the other wandering stars, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and Mercury, must also transmit physical energy. He writes, "A certain power, derived from the ethereal nature, is diffused over and pervades the whole atmosphere of the earth. Fire and air are encompassed and altered by the motions of the ether." Listen to that language. Diffused, pervades, flows. Ptolemy's universe was wet. It was a system of fluids. He defined reality using 4 building blocks: heat, cold, moisture, and dryness. To the ancient mind, these were the literal mechanics of existence. Heat and moisture are the forces of life. They allow things to connect. A seed needs warmth and water to burst. A conversation needs warmth to be friendly and fluidity to move. Ptolemy states that 2 of the 4 temperaments or qualities are nutritive and prolific, viz. Heat and moisture. By these all matter coalesces and is nourished. Cold and dryness are the forces of death. They cause things to separate. Clay cracks when it is dry, leaves wither, corpses turn cold. Ptolemy defines these as noxious and destructive, causing matter to decay and dissipate. Good is connection, evil is separation. Into this hydraulic machine steps Mercury. The Greeks called him Stillborn, the gleaming, the glittering one, the twinkling one, the chameleon. He is the problem child of the solar system. Mars is always hot and dry, fire. Saturn is always cold and dry, death. But Mercury is everything. Ptolemy writes that Mercury sometimes produces dryness and at other times moisture, and each with equal vigor. He is the cosmic pump, because he moves so fast, completing an orbit in just 88 days, and because he never strays far from the sun, he is constantly switching between inhaling and exhaling. Thus, according to Ptolemy, Mercury regulates the humidity of the collective consciousness. And here is the secret. Here is the physics behind the superstition. Retrograde is not a curse, it is a drought. Ptolemy maps the cycle with the precision of an engineer. When Mercury is moving fast, emerging from the sun in the morning, what we call direct or matutine, he is chiefly productive of moisture. This is the Mercury of the good days. The moisture is high. The connective tissue of the world is lubricated. Words flow, ink binds to paper. Money flows from hand to hand. The market is liquid. But then the planet slows down. It reaches its station. It turns backward, just like it is doing right now. Ptolemy is explicit. As the planet rises at night and moves toward its second station, the retrograde phase, the pump reverses. The planet becomes productive of dryness. This is the breakdown. To the ancient mind, this dryness was a literal atmospheric condition, a lack of binding agent in nature. To us, living in a digital ether, it feels like a lack of bandwidth. We experience this ancient concept of dryness as latency. We experience it as packet loss. When the moisture, the metaphysical lubricant that allows distinct human beings to connect, evaporates, the atmosphere becomes brittle. Friction increases. You try to send an email, but the connection is too dry to carry the signal. You try to bond with a partner, but the emotional humidity drops to 0. You rub 2 ideas together, and instead of a spark, you get grinding. When we say Mercury retrograde breaks technology, we are using a clumsy modern metaphor for this elegant ancient reality. We are describing the loss of connective fluid. The Wi-Fi signal is a stream. During the dryness, the stream runs low. The trade agreement is binding. During the dryness, the glue cracks, but it gets deeper. Ptolemy adds one final, devastating detail to the physics of this phenomenon. It isn't just about moisture. It is about power. In the Tetrabiblos, strength is defined by speed and direction. A planet is at its peak power when it is oriental, swift and direct. Why? Because it is moving with the universe. It is sprinting forward. But when a planet becomes retrograde, Ptolemy notes that it loses strength and acts with smaller effect. This was the verdict of the 2nd century. To the ancient observer, the retrograde planet was not malicious. It was weak. The signal drops. The jumpy one loses his footing. And because in this ancient worldview, Mercury ruled the rational mind and the tongue, The implication was that our own ability to process data would lose its strength along with him. We would become weak, our logic would falter, we would miss the decimal point. Fast forward to 2025. The modern market crash, that 3.22% drop in value, is a collective behavioral echo of this ancient idea. The investors do not need to know Ptolemy's name to feel the anxiety. The belief channel identified by the researchers proves that when the culture signals retrograde, the traders signal stop. They withdraw. This withdrawal creates a literal liquidity drought in the market. By refusing to trade, the modern investor inadvertently reenacts the ancient physics of dryness. They create the very stagnation they fear. But there is one more layer to the Ptolemaic code, and it is perhaps the most profound. It offers a framework for the specific kind of confusion we feel today. It offers a language for why we might struggle to remember a password, yet vividly recall a dream we had 10 years ago. Ptolemy distinguishes between two types of human consciousness, determined by the position of Mercury. The first is the Oriental mind. When Mercury is swift and rising before the sun, the mind becomes liberal, frank, self-confident, brave, ingenious, unreserved yet acute. This is the mode of the high-frequency trader, the architect, the general, the mind that projects outward and grabs the world. The second is the Occidental mind. When Mercury turns backward or sets after the sun, the switch flips. The energy turns inward. Ptolemy says the mind becomes ingenious and sagacious, but not capable of great recollection, inquisitive in occult matters, and to the judgment of dreams. Hear that again. Not capable of great recollection. In the Ptolemaic system, this is the definition of the retrograde mind, a failure of data retention, a loss of the frank and self-confident edge. But look what replaces it, the judgment of dreams. The ancient argument is that the retrograde is not a time for data. It is a time for divination. The mind shifts from the marketplace to the temple. You lose your keys, but you find your dreams. You lose your logic, but you find your intuition. The distress we feel, the panic that makes the stock market crash, might come from a friction between these two modes. We live in a civilization that demands the Oriental mind 24 hours a day. We demand constant productivity and constant recollection. But perhaps when the cycle shifts to the Occidental mode, and when the moisture of easy connection dries up and the mind turns toward the mysteries, we panic. We try to force the dreaming mind to balance a spreadsheet. We try to force the inward gaze to navigate the outward world. And it breaks. This is the source code, this is the physics of the glitch. The retrograde is a season of dryness and dreams, but something is missing. Ptolemy told us the signal gets weak, he told us the air gets dry. But he never told us that our friends would betray us. He never told us that the letter would return to the sender. He never told us that signing a contract was an act of suicide. He saw weakness, he did not see malice. So where did the fear come from? Where did we get this specific paranoid rule that everything you do will be undone? To find the source of the fear and the specific virus that has infected the modern mind, we have to leave the marble halls of Alexandria. We have to watch the Roman Empire burn. We have to travel forward 1,000 years into the mud and blood of the Middle Ages to a fortress in Italy, where a man named Guido Bonatti is about to turn astrology from a science of weather into a weapon of war. The Roman Empire collapsed, the marble cracked, the great scrolls were burned or lost or scattered into the desert winds. For 1,000 years, the rigorous mathematical understanding of the signs in the firmament went dark in the West. The lights that Genesis promised us, the ones meant to divide the day from the night, became dim, obscured by the smoke of burning cities. When astrology finally returned to Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries, carried in the saddlebags of crusaders and the trunks of Arab translators, it arrived in a world that had forgotten the physics of moisture. It arrived in a world of iron. We are now in the High Middle Ages. We are in Italy. The air is not dry in the Ptolemaic sense, but thick with the smoke of siege engines. The city-states are at war. Guelphs and Ghibellines are slaughtering each other in the streets. In this world, nobody cares about the temperament of the soul. They care about survival. They care about victory. And so, the interpretation of the sky had to change. It had to become a weapon. Enter Guido Bonatti. If Ptolemy was the physicist of the stars, Bonatti was their sniper. He was the most famous, the most feared, and perhaps the most dangerous astrologer of the 13th century. He stood on the ramparts of Forli, advising warlords when to march, when to siege, and when to kill. He was so effective, so terrifyingly precise, that Dante Alighieri, writing his Divine Comedy, did not place Bonatti in purgatory. He threw him into the 8th circle of hell. In Dante's vision, Bonatti is forced to walk for eternity with his head twisted backward, crying tears down his own spine, a punishment for daring to look too far forward. But Bonatti didn't care about hell. He cared about the signs mentioned in Luke. He looked at the distress of nations, the perplexity, and he decided that the retrograde was not a weather report. It was a warning of treason. Recall Ptolemy's definition. For the ancients, a retrograde planet was weak. It was a loss of strength. It was a drying up of the vital fluids. Bonatti looked at that same backward motion and saw something far more sinister. In a feudal society, where everything depended on oaths, loyalty, and the sworn word, going backward was the ultimate sin. Dr. Nicholas Campion, a historian of cosmology, tells us exactly how the medieval mind viewed this phenomenon. In the Middle Ages, if you asked a question of the stars, a retrograde planet was not a sign of delay. It was a negative. It was a sign that the thing you wanted was unlikely to happen. Do you see the shift? Do you feel the temperature drop? We moved from physics to ethics. To Ptolemy, a retrograde Mercury meant your mind was tired. It meant you lacked the moisture to connect ideas. To the medieval mind, a retrograde Mercury meant you were a liar. It meant the person you were dealing with, the ally, the merchant, or the lover, was about to renege. They were about to return to their original position. They were about to break the contract. The god Hermes, after all, was not just the god of commerce. He was explicitly the god of thieves. This is the moment the virus entered the operating system. This is the specific historical instant where the fear of retrograde was born. It wasn't about technology. It wasn't about travel. It was about the terror of being betrayed. The modern meme that screams, "Don't sign contracts during Mercury retrograde," is not ancient wisdom. It is military intelligence from a 13th century Italian war zone. It is a warning that the other party is a trickster who will walk back their promise the moment the planet turns. The medieval astrologers gave us one more image, a concrete visual metaphor that would eventually mutate into the broken email of the 21st century. They applied the logic of retrograde motion to the messenger. In the 13th century, information moved at the speed of a horse. If you were a prince waiting for news of the battle, or a merchant waiting for a letter of credit, the messenger was the most important figure in your world. The logic was ruthless and literal. The planet moves forward. The planet stops. The planet moves backward. Therefore, the messenger rides out. The messenger stops. The messenger rides back. He does not deliver the letter. He hits a roadblock. He loses heart. He turns around at the city gates and comes home. This rule, this specific tactical diagnosis of a failed delivery, is the great-grandfather of our modern glitch. When you send a text and it fails to deliver, when your email bounces back, when the server times out, you are reenacting a 700-year-old drama of a rider turning his horse around on a muddy road in Italy. You're experiencing the return of the messenger. We have inherited this anxiety. We have stripped away the medieval context. We have forgotten the warlords and the sieges, but we have kept the fear. We feel the perplexity that Luke spoke of. We see the signs in the sun and the moon, and our instinct is no longer to prepare for a drought. It is to prepare for a double cross. The dryness of the ancient world became the dishonesty of the medieval world. The weakness became malice. And as Europe crawled out of the Middle Ages and into the age of commerce, this fear would need to mutate again. It would need to leave the battlefield and enter the marketplace. It would need to stop worrying about treason and start worrying about profit. The stage is set for the next evolution. We are going to London. We are going to meet the man who turned the returned messenger into the lost letter and laid the final brick in the wall of our modern anxiety. We step into the smog and ink of 1647 London. The English Civil War is tearing the country apart. The king is losing, the Parliament is rising, and in the middle of this chaos, a man named William Lilly is trying to organize the universe. Lilly was not a mystic in a cave. He was a man of the city, a consultant, a proto-data analyst. He understood that the modern world was becoming too complex for the simple, sweeping dryness of Ptolemy. The merchant didn't want to know about the atmosphere. He wanted to know about his ship. The wife didn't want to know about the temperament. She wanted to know about her husband. So, in his masterpiece, Christian Astrology, Lilly did something radical. He bureaucratized the sky. If we look at the table of contents of this massive work, we see the blueprint of the modern anxious mind. Lilly assigned the planets to specific departments, or houses. He created a filing cabinet for human destiny. This is where the specific anxieties of the 21st century were born. Lilly looked at the third house. In the Ptolemaic system, this was a vague territory of siblings and short trips. Lilly sharpened it. He explicitly assigned it to rumors, if true or false, and intelligence. Think about that. In 1647, he created a specific astrological category for misinformation. When we panic today about fake news or a misleading tweet during a retrograde, we are operating out of Lilly's third house. We are fearing the corruption of the data. But he didn't stop there. He realized that the news is distinct from the carrier. He looked at the fifth house. He assigned this sector to ambassadors and messengers, and a messenger sent forth upon any errand. This is a critical distinction that the modern mind has collapsed. The third house is the rumor, the software, the content. The fifth house is the messenger, the hardware, the server. Lilly taught us that these things could break separately. You could have a true rumor carried by a slow messenger. You could have a false rumor carried by a fast one. He atomized our fear. He taught us to worry about the infrastructure of communication, not just the content. Now apply the logic of the retrograde to this new bureaucracy. In horary astrology, the art of answering specific questions, the motion of the planet determines the outcome of the question. Direct motion, the story moves forward. Retrograde motion, the story moves backward. When you apply this to the fifth house, messengers, the implication is mechanical and terrifying. If the planet ruling the messenger goes retrograde, the messenger does not arrive. He reverses course. He returns to the sender. This is the ancestor of our bounced email. It is the ancestor of the delivery exception. When we see the message not delivered notification on our screens, we are seeing the digital ghost of Lilly's fifth house. We are seeing the messenger turn his horse around. The anxieties we feel about latency and failed delivery are not new. They are 17th century logistical fears transferred onto 21st century fiber optics. This brings us back to the economic crash. Why does the market drop 3.22% question mark? Why does the volatility vanish? Because the modern investor has internalized Lilly's bureaucracy. They believe that the infrastructure of the deal, the fifth house, the messenger, is compromised. They believe the rumor, the third house, might be false. They believe the messenger might return. And so they enact the only rational strategy for a world where the infrastructure is broken. They stop. The drop in volatility is the collective result of millions of people refusing to send the messenger. They are waiting for the planet to turn direct. They are waiting for the infrastructure to be repaired. William Lilly didn't know about servers. He didn't know about Wi-Fi, but he built the mental framework that allows us to fear them. He taught us that the sky has specific departments for rumors and messengers. He taught us that those departments can malfunction. He transformed the dryness of Ptolemy, a general atmospheric condition, into the glitch of the modern era, a specific systemic failure. We are no longer just worried about the soul, we are worried about the male. And that shift, from the spiritual to the logistical, is what prepared us for the final mutation, the era of the algorithm. The Age of Reason had no patience for stargazers. The universities closed their doors to astrology. The Royal Society turned its back. The practice did not vanish. It merely migrated. It left the city and went to the country. It took off the velvet coat of the consultant and put on the muddy boots of the farmer. Historical records show us exactly where the retrograde went during the Age of Reason. It hid in the British agricultural almanacs of the mid-18th century. Farmers are the original pragmatists. They do not care about the temperament of the soul. They care about the harvest. They read the almanacs to sync their planting schedules with the sky. And here, in the muddy fields of Victorian England, the myth mutated again. Look at the irony. Ptolemy, the physicist, told us the retrograde was a time of dryness. He warned of a drought. The Victorians, obsessed with the weather, inverted the physics. They feared the storm. They feared the flood. They saw the retrograde not as a lack of connection, but as an overwhelming deluge of it. The ill omen had shifted from a broken promise to a ruined crop. The 20th century brought the sky back to the city. But it didn't return to the observatory. It returned to the newsstand. In the 1970s, horoscopes became a newspaper mainstay. Astrology was no longer for princes or farmers. It was for the commuter. It was for the secretary. It was for the CEO. Pop astrologers needed simple, universal concepts to fill those column inches. They looked at the Roman god, Mercury. They remembered his portfolio. He governed travel, commerce, financial wealth, and communication. They applied a logic that was brutal in its simplicity. If the god of commerce is moving backward, then commerce itself must be moving backward. This is the birth of the modern panic. This is when the specific medieval rules about messengers exploded into a general anxiety about stuff. Suddenly, the retrograde wasn't just about a lost letter or a dry conversation. It was blamed for digestive problems and broken washing machines. The diagnostic tool had become a catch-all scapegoat for the friction of modern life. But the final mutation, the one that haunts us today, happened even more recently. The 1980s were the dawn of the corporate age, the dawn of the personal computer, the dawn of the 24-hour news cycle. In this world, things don't stop. They buffer. And so the interpretation shifted. It moved from denial to delay. The messenger became the server. The lost letter became the glitch. The anxiety adapted to fit the frustration of the office worker. We stopped fearing treason. We started fearing latency. Why did this specific astrological rule survive when so many others died? Why does your Instagram feed explode with warnings about Mercury, but you never hear about a void-of-course moon or Saturn in the Via Combusta? The answer is simplicity. Dr. Campion notes that Mercury Retrograde found popularity because it almost does not need any interpretation. It's not complicated or complex, and it applies to everybody. In the Ptolemaic system, your fate was unique to your birth chart. It was private, it was complex mathematics. Mercury retrograde is collective. When Mercury is retrograde, it is retrograde for everyone. It creates a shared experience of chaos. It allows a teenager in London and a stock trader in Tokyo to share the same meme. It creates a community of frustration. Psychologists have a name for this. They call it confirmation bias. We have built a prison out of a hashtag. We have taken the ancient physics of the soul, the ebb and flow of attention, the drying up of connection, and we have turned it into a superstition about broken glass. So what is actually happening up there? We must end with the physical reality. We must look at the solar system one last time, not as a mystic, but as a mechanic. According to NASA and the Planetary Society, the phenomenon is an optical illusion. There is not enough evidence that retrograde motions affect any of us. The gravity argument is dead. As Dr. Hammergren notes, a car 20 feet away from you will exert a stronger pull of gravity than the planet Mercury does. The planet is not pulling on you. It is not breaking your phone. It is simply running its race. It is exactly like passing a car on a highway. If you are in the fast lane, Mercury, and you zoom past a slower car, Earth, that slower car briefly appears to move backward relative to you. It is a trick of perspective. But as we learn from the stock market data, illusions can destroy economies. The market crashes because we believe the illusion. The volatility drops because we are afraid of the shadow. We have forgotten the wisdom of Ptolemy. We have forgotten that the retrograde is a time to stop forcing connections. We have forgotten that it is a time of the Occidental mind, a time to dream, to review, to reflect. Instead, we try to sprint through the drought. We try to force the wet ink of commerce onto the dry paper of the retrograde sky, and when it cracks, we blame the stars. Mercury retrograde is not a curse. It is a cosmic mandate to stop. It is a quarterly reminder that you cannot perpetually exhale. Eventually, you must inhale. And if you refuse, if you insist on signing the contract, sending the risky text, or trading the volatile stock during the dry season, well, as the data shows, the market will punish you for it. We have dismantled the machine. We have taken the clockwork apart. We have seen the hydraulic physics of Ptolemy, the paranoia of the medieval warlords, the anxieties of the Victorian farmers, and the statistical terror of the modern stock market. We've seen how a simple optical illusion, a trick of perspective on a cosmic racetrack, became a psychological leviathan capable of erasing 3.22% of global equity value annually. But we are not just historians. We are living in this moment. It is November 2025. The planet is retrograde now. The market is quiet. The volatility has dropped. You're holding your breath. So what do we do? If we know the crash is caused by our own fear, by the belief channel that freezes our hand before we click buy, does that mean we should ignore it? Should we be the brave contrarian who sprints when the world stops? No. That is the trap of the modern ego. The final secret of the retrograde is not about defying the stars. It is about aligning with them. It is about understanding that the glitch is actually a feature. Carl Jung, the great cartographer of the unconscious, famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." We call it Mercury retrograde. We call it bad luck. We call it the system is down. But what if it is just the collective unconscious of the human species screaming for a nap? Ptolemy told us that during the retrograde, the mind shifts to the mode of dreams, mysteries, and the occult. In Jungian terms, this is a forced confrontation with the unconscious. It is a withdrawal of libido, psychic energy, from the external world of objects and a redirection of that energy into the internal world of symbols. The brain fog you feel, the inability to recall data, that is your psyche pulling the plug on the mask you wear for the marketplace so that the self can breathe. The anxiety of the retrograde comes from the friction between your ego, which wants to send the email, sign the deal, dominate the timeline, and your soul, which wants to go into the desert and be silent. The breakdown of technology is a synchronicity. It is the external world mirroring the internal need for a hard reset. The server crashes because you need to crash. The message bounces because you need to stop talking. This brings us to the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius, writing from his tent on the Danube, would have laughed at our panic over broken iPhones, but he would have understood the physics. The Stoic discipline is about distinguishing between what is in our control and what is not. We cannot control the orbit of Mercury. We cannot control the dryness of the atmosphere. We cannot control the distress of nations. But we can control our ascent. When the email bounces, you have two choices. Choice A, the modern panic, you rage, you refresh the page, you scream at the sky, you force the moistureless air to carry your voice. This is the path of friction. This is the path that leads to the 3.22% loss. Choice B, the Stoic pivot, you recognize the season. You say, the wind has changed, the tide is going out. You stop rowing, you let the boat drift. You use the time to mend the nets. This is the wisdom of the pause. The retrograde is not a time to act. It is a time to review. The prefix re is the key. Review, revise, reconsider, reconnect. The lost letter of William Lilly returns to the sender not because the sender is cursed, but because the sender needs to read it again. Maybe the message was wrong. Maybe the contract was flawed. Maybe the venture you were about to start was a mistake. The retrograde is the universe's quality control department. It breaks the things that were already broken. It reveals the cracks in the foundation before you build the skyscraper. We stand here in 2025, a year of immense noise. The algorithms are screaming. The artificial intelligences are hallucinating. The markets are trembling. The sea and the waves of data are roaring louder than at any point in human history. We need Mercury retrograde. We need it desperately. We need the check engine light. We need the moment where the logic fails, where the data vanishes, where the Oriental mind of constant productivity is forced to its knees so that the Occidental mind of wisdom can stand up. The 3.22% drop in the global markets is not a tragedy. It is a tithe. It is the price we pay for the necessary silence. It is the economy taking a breath. If we did not have these periods of dryness, these periods of withdrawal and hesitation, we would burn ourselves out. We would sprint until our hearts exploded. The belief channel that stops the market is a survival mechanism. It is the collective wisdom of the species saying, wait, look again, are you sure? So how do you live through this? How do you navigate the anomaly of Hermes? You do not hide under the bed. You do not buy crystals to ward off the bad vibes. You simply change your gear. When the sky turns backward, you turn inward. When the data fails, you look at the dream. When the contract stalls, you look at the relationship. When the messenger returns, you open the letter and read it again. You accept the dryness. You accept the weakness. You realize that weakness is just a different kind of strength. The strength of the root growing deep in the dark, waiting for the rain to return. The planet Mercury is millions of miles away. It is a rock. It does not care about you. But the idea of Mercury, the archetype, the god, the glitch, is inside you. It is the part of you that knows when to stop. Listen to it. Let the email bounce. Let the market drop. Let the silence come. And when the planet turns direct, when the moisture returns to the air and the heat returns to the blood, you will be ready. You will not just be moving fast. You will be moving true. And let them be for signs and for seasons. The sign has been given. The season is here. Be wise, be silent, and let the runner pass.